Well, hey, everybody, I wanted to take a moment, just catch you up on the Jennifer Gledhill murder trial that's going to be coming up. She had a hearing just a few days ago, and I posted a video on that that hopefully some of you caught. If not, go back and get it. But I wanted to give you a summary of the charges against her and share a couple of things that I'm going to be talking on Court TV about tonight. Well, thanks for joining Profiling Evil. I hope you'll take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, ring the bell, let your friends know about us, and share us in the community, please. I wanted to jump into this thing and just talk a little bit before I go online tonight with Vinnie Politan on Court TV to talk about this murder case. Now, I've been doing a little studying, doing a little prep, looking at some of the case a little deeper, but most importantly, doing some geographic mapping of the thing. But first and foremost, I want to update you on the summary of the charges against Jennifer Gledhill. First and foremost, she's been charged with first-degree felony murder with an enhancement of domestic violence. The allegation, she shot her husband in the head while he was sleeping in their Cottonwood Heights home on or about September 21st, 2024. Now, she's also facing 5 counts of second-degree felony obstruction of justice. And these are for things like taking steps to try to hinder the investigation. Here's a few things. You might be guilty of these yourself. Deleting her WhatsApp messages. Now, this one you don't have. Disposing of a bloody mattress, cleaning the house, disposing of a gun, and moving the victim's truck to make it appear that he left the area. He's also charged with second-degree felony possession to control or possession of controlled substances with an intent to distribute. So this is because she had psilocybin mushrooms packaged for individual sale, and those were in her possession. A third-degree felony of abuse or desecration of a human body, allegedly for moving and concealing Matthew Johnson's body. And I don't know if she's going to work out some kind of a deal if she gives up the body, but now's the time that she ought to be talking about those kinds of things and see if she can get a better deal, especially using that to maybe get her parents a little better deal because they're involved in this darn thing as well. And then she has a third-degree felony tampering with a witness where she allegedly tried to prevent the state's informant from revealing the confession that she gave them. So let's go back and just look at the case real quickly and catch up to where we were at the time we put that last video out. So in March of 2024, Jennifer Gledhill moved out of their home, and it was a home that he owned prior to the marriage, but she moved out of the home and began divorce proceedings. By August or September, Jennifer Gledhill allegedly showed an informant who came forward later a tan Glock handgun. And that happened just days before Matthew Johnson's death. Now, in between there was kind of an interesting time because she actually had Matthew Johnson removed from the home by filing a protective order that the court later threw out. And that's really important because right now, on September 16th, just 5 days before Matthew Johnson was allegedly murdered, because we don't know where this guy is, his lawyer in this divorce proceeding told a reporter that the court had filed an order to dismiss Jennifer Gledhill's protective order, and that happened on September 16th. Again, just 5 days before this guy was allegedly murdered. And frankly, from the evidence, I'm going to just say probably was murdered. Now, on September 19th, this is when the informant says he observed Gledhill with a Glock 9mm weapon. And it's actually a weapon that belonged to Matthew Johnson. And she was pulling the slide back, making it very clear to the informant that the weapon was loaded. Now, on the night of the murder, September 20th, maybe into the early morning hours of September 21st of 2024, Jennifer was in the home still. Now, remember, That protective order scheme that she had fallen apart, and the court had thrown it out, and there was now a motion to get that thing completely thrown out from the court system. But she was still in the home, and he came home, and they had a confrontation. Now some people say that it's being reported that he confronted her about having an affair. I don't know that for sure, but that's what it appears to be. Now, she and Johnson were in the home together, and a neighbor reported hearing an incredibly heated argument between Jennifer and Matthew in that home. And it was significant enough that the neighbor could hear it from down the street and make notation of it. Now, by the early morning hours of September 21st, Gledhill allegedly shot Matthew Johnson in the head as he slept in their shared bed. She then, according to the prosecution, moved his body into a rooftop storage container. That's the kind of container you see on top of a minivan, or somebody that's got a smaller vehicle and they're loading a bunch of gear in it to go up skiing or something else. The allegation is that she stuffed him in that rooftop storage container, slid it down the stairs, and then made it and worked it into the back of her minivan. And all of that happened after she reportedly murdered him. On that same morning, her cell phone places her near the location where Matthew Johnson's truck was later found. And surveillance footage confirmed that she later made some pretty interesting steps along the way. Number one, that she traveled to a certain location. I'm going to come up to that a little later. And that she was later seen after that going to a gas station and a car wash, all before Matthew Johnson was ever reported missing. Now, that's another neighbor on September 24th reported seeing Gledhill's parents cleaning her house. And they say that the parents were there for nearly 5 hours, cleaning late into the evening, leaving about 11 o'clock at night. They also are now, the prosecution is saying that the family ordered a new mattress that was delivered to the parents' house and then brought to Matthew Johnson's house, or Jennifer Gledhill's home at the time. On September 25th of 2024, Matthew is finally reported missing by a colleague in the National Guard. And this one is a little bit unclear to me because the report out there suggests, at least to me, that the National Guard guy reports his buddy missing. He calls the police and says, "Hey, Matthew Johnson, one of our leaders here in the Guard, has not showed up for work. And that really worries me." Well, law enforcement started investigating that. And this is where things are a little bit murky. I don't know for sure what happened, but I think it's going to be critical if it happens the way I'm thinking it did. And that is that after that National Guard soldier called and reported to police that Matthew Johnson had not come back to work, that he couldn't be found, that he wasn't answering his phone, that law enforcement reached out to his estranged wife to find out where he was. She says at that time, "We got in a fight, he left, he said he was going to be gone for a week, and don't try to find him." But it was the National Guard that brought this to law enforcement's attention, not the wife. And she finally, a week later, admits that he isn't around. And what isn't around, I think, will become clear. On September 30th, law enforcement locates Matthew's truck just a quarter of a mile from his home, just to the south. And we're going to talk about that on Court TV tonight. We're going to talk about the evidence that's been discovered in this case. And again, you can go back to my earlier video on this, but I want to reiterate a couple of things that I'm going to share on the show tonight. Number one, that blood evidence was found under the bed in his home, where his head would be toward the top of that bed. Blood was also found on the slats of the bed frame and on a cutout piece of carpet sample that police recovered. And all of that had DNA that was confirmed to be Matthew's blood. Now, the blood amount under the bed would suggest that it was a traumatic event. A rooftop storage container was recovered a few days later, but it was recovered in a really strange way because there were rainstorms And this is an area where I live, and I know the area where this body was supposedly dumped really well. It is a tough, marshy area, and it would be easy to hide a body in that place. But the rooftop storage container that law enforcement believes belonged to Matthew Johnson and Jennifer Gledhill, the roof of that was recovered out in the waterfowl management area just west of Salt Lake City Valley area, the north end of the Salt Lake Valley. It's called the Farmington Bay Waterfowl Bird Refuge. Now, that's all that was found was that storage container's top, but in there they recovered DNA from Matthew. His blood was in there. As the search continued, they found the missing mattress, missing pillows, and they found a rug that the prosecution clearly showed coming from the interior of the home. In fact, Matthew Johnson was sleeping on the couch at the moment that that photograph was taken with the rug in the picture. So in this most recent hearing, the prosecutor also announced some additional pieces of evidence that I think are incredibly powerful. Number one, that the informant had recorded a phone call between him and Gledhill where she admitted to killing Matthew and instructing the informant to keep quiet. Now, in that call, Jennifer refers to Matthew in the past tense, and this is days before this guy was officially declared missing. Now, statements from Matthew's family also came out in the hearing where they expressed concern for their safety, for the children's safety, and they pled with the court to deny bail. The confidential informant expressed concern for his safety if Gledhill was released. And the prosecution reminded the judge that Jennifer Gledhill told this confidential informant, I think in that recorded statement, that she would commit suicide rather than go to prison. So, for her own safety, the prosecution also opined that that alone was reason enough to keep her locked up until her trial.
So, what are your thoughts about some of this physical evidence corroborating what the informant lover is saying? I mean, that's what you want when you're putting it together, right?
Yeah, you got it, Vinny. And you know me, I mean, I'm always about the behavioral evidence as well. And so I think if we backtrack, go back to March, she files for divorce. She then tries this attempt at using the protective order as a way to gain the property. But I found some things interesting with the idea that the court had decided and put a motion into place to absolve and get rid of that protective order 5 days before he disappears. So during that period of time, she still is inhabiting the house, even though the court has come back and said, hey, we don't believe that that was something worthy of a protective order. So we start seeing the animosity start to pile on top of each other. And we start seeing motive for anger and for the problems that are coming down the road. But then we get the testimony of the informant who says, yeah, even a couple of days before this event, she's cycling around in a 9mm weapon and saying, hey, this thing's ready and I'm ready. And so we see all of this kind of testing. We used to call it in the business trial ballooning, where they're sending out messages to kind of set the stage and do things. But then this thing becomes pretty disorganized once it happens, and she goes in and confesses to her lover. You know, with Vinny, I also talked about Jennifer Gledhill's parents' involvement in the case. And together, we tried to make sense of the charges that they're facing for obstructing justice. And I'll tell you, what a tough position for parents to be put in. But I hope my kids know I'm going to go with them to the police department to confess what they did, not try to help them get out of it. But anyway, in the media reports, we're learning that her parents, the Gledhills, were arrested on charges of obstructing justice, and that was related to this alleged murder of their son-in-law, Matthew Johnson. Now, authorities claim that the couple assisted their daughter in not only cleaning the crime scene, but disposing of evidence and in getting that new mattress and trying to stage this scene. Remember, witnesses reported seeing Gledhill's parents at the residence for about 5 hours, engaged in cleaning activities, both inside the house and in the garage. And these observations contradict any of the statements that the Gledhill parents might have made to investigators, in which they claimed to have been at the house for less than an hour and denied any involvement in cleaning that thing. So that's going to be a real problem for them. But during questioning, according to news reports, the father, Gledhill, was asked if he entered the master bedroom where this murder allegedly occurred. His response was, quote, "I did not go in where the incident happened," close quote. That's a pretty powerful admission. Additionally, investigators discovered that Jennifer's mother purchased this new mattress at Jennifer's request. And that original mattress, believed to be involved in the incident, where those remains were, matches the one that was recovered in the marsh.
All right, Mike, what do you think? Because I think this will be an issue in the case, right? How do you get this man inside the container? We've covered the story of the woman and a man in a suitcase, so we know this stuff can happen. But what are your thoughts about her alone getting him inside that container, her alone getting that container into a minivan?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen stories of people, Vinny, when they have a lot of adrenaline going, having superhuman strength to do a lot of things. But I think a couple of things that are important here, and you mentioned it, I would just say State's Exhibit A, Sarah Boone getting Torres in that suitcase and that causing his death. And that's a guy who's fighting, not a guy who's deceased. And that, we don't know whether he was even in one piece when he was put inside of that thing. But what we do know is that his body or parts of his body was inside of that thing at some point, even if it was a finger going inside and cutting himself on vacation, which would make her the most unlucky person on the planet. So all of these actions have led authorities to charge her parents with obstructing justice, alleging that they played a role in concealing the crime and hindering the investigation. Well, the next question we talked about on Court TV is, where on earth is Matthew Johnson? And to answer that, I want to go to a series of maps and discuss how complex this question really is. You see, as we look at the map, you can see 4 locations identified on the map. At the very bottom, or this southern end of the map, this is all in the Salt Lake City Valley area. The Johnson Gledhill home is located where this point is. And within a few blocks of that, the location where Johnson's truck was recovered on the day of his murder. Now, evidence collected off of Jennifer Gledhill's mobile device states that she was seen somewhere around that same location where Matthew's truck was at about 6 a.m. on September 21st. Now, the prosecution is opining that this was after she had committed the murders. So then she has about 7 hours to do something. Maybe that's get the body into this tote and start cleaning up. I don't know what happened, but for the next 7 hours, she's at the residence. And then at 1:44 p.m., her mobile device indicates that she starts traveling kind of westbound down to the main interstate, and then from there, northbound from the Salt Lake Valley up into Davis County. That trip should take, on a Sunday afternoon, which that is what it was, it should take about 41 minutes to get there. So it's kind of interesting because about 51 minutes after she leaves the residence, it appears that she turns off her phone somewhere near the waterfowl management area that I've talked about. And now her phone remains off for the next 2.5 hours. Now, this is where things really get interesting from a geographic perspective, because on the map, I've indicated how far Jennifer Gledhill could have traveled and still make it back to the location where her phone once again turns on and sends out a ping saying, "Hey, here's my location." In reality, she could have made it as far as the Utah-Idaho border, and she could have made it as far south as the very southern end of the Salt Lake Valley and clear out almost into the western desert by the Salt Flats. So to make sense of this, just think about how far you could drive your own car on a Sunday afternoon in an hour and 15 minutes. Because if that phone was turned off for 2.5 hours, she could theoretically make a 1 hour and 15-minute drive outbound, drop the body, and return and make that hour and 15-minute drive back in and get back to that same location where the ping surfaces. If she's being cagey, then that would make sense. But we know that evidence was recovered in that marsh, the top of the tote, the travel tote, the bed mattress, the rug. All of that is recovered in a specific location, which makes us think that it's more likely that his body was also dumped in the same area that all of that other evidence was dumped. And that becomes very problematic as well. So in my discussion with Vinnie Politan on Court TV tonight, I'm going to be discussing this information and my concern that if Matthew's body was dumped in that area, and now if he was still in that tote, knowing that that tote has somehow come apart, the top has come off, it's really questionable of where his body could be and whether it may even be found at this point. Now, undoubtedly, the sheriff's office and the police department will be taking cadaver dogs out into the marsh, trying to see if they can come across the body as a result of scent. But right now, it's really cold in the Salt Lake Valley. So it might take a month until things really start to warm up before something like that is possible. But we also have to take into account that Matthew's body might have been cut into smaller pieces. And as gruesome as that is to think about, we see that happening in a lot of these cases. And depending on where she was driving, she could have been disposing the body in multiple locations. And that may have been how she actually got the body into that small container, which I'm going to come back on in a minute. But that brings me up to another thing. And that is that out in the marsh, there are animals that would go out, and if they could forage on this body, they would definitely do that. It's called animal predation. And it's likely that a fox or a coyote or some other kind of carnivorous animal might have invaded that tote and separated the tote from the body and scattered parts all over. And when you're dealing with a marsh, it is next to impossible to recover parts of bodies in a marsh. In fact, think about the Harmony Montgomery case for a moment, where she allegedly was dumped in the marshes north of Boston, Massachusetts. Again, folks, recovering a body in a murky and muddy body of water is next to impossible.
Okay, Mike, I want to read for you the affidavit of probable cause for the father. On September 26, 2024, the suspect messaged Thomas Gledhill that the mattress be delivered to his address. The suspect's cell phone message showed she would pick up the mattress from Thomas. Thomas denied cleaning his daughter's house on the night of September 24th. Witnesses stated they saw Thomas at his daughter's house and that he was cleaning. Data from the suspect's cell phone showed on the afternoon the suspect was north of Salt Lake County. The suspect's cell phone showed she had called Thomas Gledhill, and then promptly the phone was shut off. Immediately after the phone was turned on, a call was made to Thomas Gledhill. During the time up north, the only calls made by the suspect were to Thomas. What are your thoughts about how this potentially went down and when the father gets involved here if these allegations are true?
If I could, I'd like to put it in two buckets. The first bucket being what was going on at the time of the murder, or I feel pretty comfortable saying the murder. And that was that Dad later says to law enforcement, hey, I was only there for an hour, but he makes this admission where he says, I didn't go in where the incident happened. So he clearly knows that there's something going on there. And like Dr. Ludlow said, they weren't making calls to law enforcement and saying, hey, let's get the cops involved and let's fix this and we're going to get you help. What it appears is that they went along with the idea of, hey, it may not be a good idea to send the new mattress to your house. Send it to ours, we'll deliver it over. That testimony that they were there until 11 o'clock at night or 5 hours, to me, Vinny, is really big because it's so opposite of the idea of we were only there for an hour. That's really troubling. But when you start talking about the cell phone and the fact that moments before that phone goes off, she makes a phone call to Dad, that's really kind of interesting, but not that big a deal, I guess. But then the phone goes dead. But when it gets turned on and reactivated, it's almost like calling in and reporting back on mission accomplished. And that's the part that's most troubling to me. And I think something that's going to really be difficult for them to get over. And I also want to point out that people have been kind of complaining or challenging online whether Jennifer could have fit Matthew's body inside of that tote. And the only response I'm going to give you is just step back into 2024 in the Sarah Boone case, the 47-year-old Florida woman who was convicted of second-degree murder for stuffing her boyfriend, Jorge Torres, into a suitcase, leaving him overnight and leading to his suffocation. It was smaller than this tote is, so just keep that in mind because evidence presented at the trial, including those videos from Boone's phone, clearly showed that he was in that suitcase.
Mike King, you're in Utah. You know the land. You know the geography, the topography of Utah. What surprised me here, and I saw the image of the storage unit floating, it looked like it was in a marsh. It looked more like I was covering a Florida case than a Utah case. What can you tell us?
Well, first thing is I think about Harmony Montgomery, Vinny, and the fact that we know she was disposed of somewhere in a marsh north of Boston, Massachusetts. Marshes are horrible places to look for a body, especially if that body has somehow been separated from the container that it was in. And so I think that container becomes incredibly important in this thing. And I hope that law enforcement, and I would suspect they have, that they carefully examine that tote to determine how that thing opened up. If his body was still inside of it when it was buried out there or submerged out there, then somehow that thing was opened, whether it was because the elements, and again, we've gone through a pretty rough winter here. It's been icy. The ice can move things around, but they already found this thing back before even hunting season started in Utah out there on the Duck Marsh. So that tells me that it was either the result of animal depredation, wolves and or not wolves, but fox and coyotes and other things tearing at that thing. And I think there would be physical evidence to support that could help them determine why that separation occurred. Or the body was dumped somewhere else, maybe in pieces, and that's a horrible thing to think of, or in whole somewhere, and then the tote itself was disposed of in a different location. So there are not things like tidal influenced waters out there on that marsh. It's all water that's influenced by a couple of water aquifers and the Great Salt Lake. So there's not really a lot of movement outside of the water flowing into the marshes from the mountains. And so it's going to be going one direction for the most part, unless the winds were heavy and pushed it around. So all of that comes into play in these dang investigations. And when you start looking at them, you go down 15 different rabbit holes trying to solve that single little mystery. But if they found a claw mark or a tooth mark on that, that could give them a whole lot of direction onto whether they're looking there or maybe a little further away.
Now, Gigi brought up a big point here, Mike, about the phone being turned off. And I understand you've put together some calculation on how far she could have traveled in that time with the phone off?
Yeah, you know, when we look at that image that the prosecutor showed, or this one here, the Wasatch Mountain Range there, the cell tower coverage is incredibly good because they can get them way high on those mountains. And so if those phone pings were triangulated off of cell towers, they're going to be pretty accurate. If it's actually data coming off of the mobile device, the internal GPS of it, they're going to be even better. But what it tells us is when she turns off the phone, we know that there are 150 minutes that need to be accounted for. Think about if you were to jump in your car, Vinny, and drive for an hour and 15 minutes. Even from Atlanta, you could get an awfully long ways. Now, take that and build it outward. And that image that I was showing on the map there is the area where there are accessible roads where she could get within that period of time and make it back for that ping. So she could make it to the Utah-Idaho border, and she could make it clear out to the salt flats in the Bonneville Raceway.
Now, I do have to disagree with you, Mike. It depends upon the time of day in Atlanta with the traffic and how far you could actually get in an hour.
All right, I yield.
Sometimes it might be, 5 miles.
And so it certainly makes it possible. Well, so that's what I'm going to be talking about on Court TV tonight. I hope you'll put your thoughts down below on this one, folks. I'd really like to know your comments on it. And just to kind of wrap up, the decision of the court on the February hearing was just as expected. The prosecution argued that there was substantial evidence that Matthew was murdered and that Gledhill was the perpetrator and that she posed a risk of flight if she left. The defense countered saying, hey, there's no body, no murder weapon. Matthew could have disappeared voluntarily. I don't think so. And I think it's really pointing back, especially with the massive forensic evidence against that. So the judge ruled against the defense, citing that Gledhill was a risk and that she posed a risk to the community and to the witnesses in this case. So as of today, Matthew's body still hasn't been recovered. Investigators continue to search for remains. They use GPS tracking and cell phone data and hopefully metrics off of her van to figure out exactly where she was and for how long. And that might get them closer. But again, it's still a tall order to fill to recover a body, especially if it's been pulled apart by animals or purposely dissected into parts in murky, muddy, marshy water. Gledhill, she remains in custody without bail as prosecutors prepare for her trial. Hey, look for Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like audio podcasts, folks, check out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. I think you'll be glad and you'll be able to take us on the road with you when you're out and about. Hey, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil's website at profilingevil.com. And while you're there, consider donating to us or sign up for our channel memberships or purchase my books, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult, or She Knew No Fear, the story about my great-great-grandmother's murder in 1891 and how I solved that murder 130 years later. I think you'll like the book. And by the way, folks, hang in there because in June or so, I'm going to be releasing a brand new book, and I hope you'll pick it up. Hey, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you tonight on Court TV, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.